all change. What's formless contains all form. What's timeless contains all time. The one contains every person, and that includes me. Source and center of all, the ever, the all, the good, that's me. So please join in as it becomes familiar, be sung to, or just grit your teeth and bear it. So. The whole contains all parts. What's changeless contains all change. What's formless contains all form. What's timeless contains all time. The one contains every person, and that includes me. Source and center of all, the ever, the all, and the good, that's me. The whole contains all parts. What's changeless contains all change. What's formless contains all form. What's timeless contains all time. The one contains every person, and that includes you. Source and center of all, the ever, the all, and the good, that's you. The whole contains all parts. What's changeless contains all change. What's formless contains all form. What's timeless contains all time. The one contains every person, and that includes us. Source and center of all, the ever, the all, and the good, that's us. The whole contains all parts. What's changeless contains all change. What's formless contains all form. What's timeless contains all time. The one contains every person, and that includes me. Source and center of all, the ever, the all, and the good, that's me. So, not surprisingly, that song was called The Practice Makes Progress. And I selected that song because the theme for this month is practice makes imperfect. And I'm not really gung-ho with that. I really prefer the notion of practice and progress. So the idea, one of the things that this month is looking at is how the writers wanted to focus on perfectionism and how it screws us up. And I don't really want to focus on what screws us up. I'd rather focus on what inspires us. I'd rather focus on what uplifts us. I think one of the things that gets complicated, folks, is that in pursuit of being perfect, we can get really stuck on perfectionism. And I don't think it's going to take very much for people to have to pause and think, where have I been perfectionistic? And how has being perfectionistic screwed me up? How has being just so attached to this way of doing something? And we're coming up on the Olympics, and how many of the people that are in the Olympics, how much with all the judgment is there this search for perfection, that they will have done it perfectly. And one of the things about the song that practice makes progress, I think about Simone Biles. I think, 8 years ago she was in the Olympics, and she changed the world with how she moved. And then 4 years ago, she had the courage to say, I'm not going back. I'm not in a place to go back. She very clearly identified the impact of depression in her life. And rather than try to pretend that it wasn't there, to try to look perfect and try to claim being perfect, she decided to bravely identify that she wasn't in the place to do that. And I know for kids at school, that was really inspirational, because how many people find themselves facing things like depression or anxiety or different shapes of mental illness? Particularly 4 years ago, we were in the midst of COVID. And COVID put a huge pile of trauma on top of all of the other stressors that were going on. I mean, it's been joked about a little bit about, weren't you better 4 years ago? I would really question anybody's sanity to say, yeah, 4 years ago I was better. 4 years ago, I mean, the center was like, Reba was like speaking over to our house, because we weren't supposed to be meeting in person. You know, we had the center, but we weren't really able to be at the center. We were in a place where, you know, the masks were on, where people were isolated, people were finding new ways of being in the world. And the perfect did not look like 4 years ago. So perfectionism versus the perfect. When Ernest Holmes spoke about perfect, and he spoke about perfect quite a lot. He wrote about perfect quite a lot. And Ernest Holmes really leaned into the notion of the Greek concept of perfect being what Michael said, whole and complete. We can get so caught up in how we're broken. We can get so caught up in how we feel incomplete. And in that message from the 1926 Science of Mind textbook, what Ernest was proposing is, what if we took a fraction of our time and identified the wholeness, the complete, the perfect, rather than spending so much time whining and moaning about what we don't like? I mean, I have to admit, whining about what I don't like, I come home many times and Michael listens to me kvetch about some person at the district who's made a decision which just seems completely unreasonable to me. And then I have to remind myself, and Michael gently listens, I have to remind myself, I went back to the district with a very specific notion that if I expect it to make sense, then I've got to stop. Like Bob Newhart, just stop it. Why aren't they doing something that's just reasonable? Stop it. Stop expecting reasonable. If I'm wanting reasonable, if I'm wanting common sense, I have to be the means, I have to be the channel through which common sense and reason comes about. If I spend all my time looking for somebody to be reasonable or to make sense about things, then I'm just going to be very frustrated. And I'm going to become very sarcastic, and I'm going to become very bitter. And that isn't the pathway to finding my wholeness, to finding being complete, to finding being real. Now, can any of you think of times where people drive you crazy or a situation drives you crazy and they're just not living up to what makes sense? I'm trying to see if people are there. Yeah, okay, I guess there are people that are able to get in that. Or if you can't do it, can you think of somebody in your life who does it and it just drives you crazy? That they just can't let go of their expectation about the world. These awful people. So, as we play with this, the notion of being perfect, whole, and complete, our culture's established search for perfection sets us up and removes us from the access to the process. It removes us from progress. It removes us from what that person sang about. The practice makes the progress. We're in a society that doesn't want to do any practice. It just wants it delivered.
Mm-hmm.
It wants it now. I mean, this week Michael ordered a couple things on Amazon, and it was there. You know, he ordered it the one day, and it was there the very next day.
No, Sunday.
We are in. Sunday we ordered it that morning, and it was there. It was there by the afternoon. There is this automaticity. There is this expectation that things are just going to happen, and it's just going to happen in this perfect way. And you open the package, and again, do you ever come up and it's like, this is not the perfect thing that I imagined when I saw this? It's one of the things, like, you know, a lot of times going to the store, there's a satisfaction with that, because it's like you can feel the fabric, you can feel the weight of it, you can feel what it's like. What I want to play with, and today's talk is titled, Kicking Perfectionism to the Curb. I want to help us distinguish between the perfect and perfectionism. And that when we can accept what we've judged as imperfect, we become more free and we become more authentic. So we're going to contrast wholeness and perfectionism. Wholeness and perfectionism. Science of Mind teachings that Ernest Holmes offered, what centers of spiritual living are trying to share in the broader world, proposes that all of creation is part of this perfect whole. That when creation happened, it was all good. That's in this book of Genesis. When the Creator saw what was done and said, it is good. How often are we willing to just say that it's good? How often are we willing to just let it be good? How often are we willing to look at ourselves and say, it's good? That was one of the reasons why I wrote the ever, the all, the good. That's me. That's you. That's us. We are that good. We are that place through which the good is showing up. So how do we connect to that? How do we take steps so that we can do that rather than to fall in the patterns that society presses on us? That society has said, you're not good enough. How many have had that experience? That's okay, but it could be better. How many of us live in that dual place of, it's okay, but it could be better? Always looking beyond what actually is. And again, that song, the practice makes progress, Michael will send it out. How do we just be where we are rather than spending so much energy imagining being somewhere else? If the wholeness is everything, and that includes things that we don't like, things that we deem as imperfect, what do we do to have a changed relationship with that? Well, I'm going to propose 3 things, and they're going to be all R things. So I've got 3 R's for us. I've got recognize, I've got reclaim, and I've got release. Recognize, reclaim, and release. Why the 3 R's? Because it's easier to remember something, and if there's a connection, recognize, reclaim, release. That way, even if you remember one. It's like there's an R. I know that Vaughan said something about an R. And, these are words that you're familiar with, but I'm going to give it a new context, a new place. It's kind of like when you go on a date with somebody that you know. You're still doing something in a new way. So the first thing with recognizing is recognizing that all of creation is interconnected. Physicists have identified this, that all of matter, we are made of the very stuff of stars. All of life, everything that exists is interconnected. Again, physicists have done experiments. When they've done things to this molecule here, that molecule way miles and miles away is impacted. We know I believe we've all had experiences where something happens way away from us, but we know that something has happened. And it's not like our cell phone rang and told us about it ahead of time. That we have a sense of something. That there is a communication across time and space with which we can connect. So there's this knowing that inculcates itself in awe. The little story I'm going to tell you about this kind of knowing is, I lived in Ireland. I think most of you know that. I lived in Ireland for a year, and the house where I got put was with a group of guys, and I didn't really connect with any of them. I really didn't feel like I fit in. Shocking, I know. So I ended up staying most of the time with this house of girls. And one of the afternoons, I knew that I had to get home. I was supposed to get home because there were things that I needed at home, at the place with the guys. But there was just something, I did not want to be there. There was some dread, there was something. And when I got home, our house had been ransacked. Mm. If I had been there, I would have been there when the house was being ransacked. But there was something about it that there was a dread that was inexplicable, and yet, a crazy example is I had bought a strainer and brought my strainer to Ireland. And my strainer got stolen.
Oh no.
That was one of the things that got stolen, my strainer, my beloved strainer. And it wasn't, it's ridiculous to say this, but strainers were something really easy. And to get it, I would have had to order it from France. Now, again, France is not that far. It's like ordering it from Idaho. And back in the day, if we'd had Amazon, it wouldn't have been a big deal. But my strainer was gone. And they had gone into my closet and they had taken my strainer. Yes, I didn't even put my strainer in the kitchen because I didn't trust the other guys I was with. Because, the time that I did share it, they left the food in it for days and it was so disgusting. Anyhow, I say all this because there is this interconnectedness. When we get fixated on certain elements of life, perfectionism narrows our focus, and it precludes us from recognizing and reveling in and celebrating that connectedness. We chop everything up. We get fixated on things that really don't matter, like I was fixated on my strainer. With that interconnected, we can identify what we assess as imperfect, as part of the bigger picture, as a call to us. Maybe, there's something in us that we're not satisfied with yet. We've got this practice leads to progress. There is progress here. And this so-called imperfection is a calling to us to move on and to become more. To put our time and attention in stuff. And with this recognition of this all-connectedness, that can lead to a sense of acceptance of ourselves and our acceptance of others. And we all know that when we model self-acceptance, it conveys that to other people. When we're accepting of ourselves, it gives others permission to be accepting of themselves. So Ernest Holmes had written, "The Spirit has already ordained that nature is perfect. It would be impossible for Spirit to ordain anything else, since in order to be at all, it must be perfect in its nature. A perfect cause must produce a perfect effect. The normal functions of life are harmonious, but we interfere with these in our ignorance, and we bring discord into temporary being." We interfere with these in our ignorance and bring discord into temporary being. So just pause on a moment and consider that it's temporary being, and that our ignorance doesn't have to be lasting. It doesn't have to be Velcroed to us and stuck to us permanently. With Velcro, you can rip it off. You can rip it apart. So recognize what? Recognize that everything is interconnected. Even the things that we don't like, they're there, and we get to embrace them in some way. Now the second R is reclaim. Well, what are we reclaiming? We are reclaiming our power. Do you feel powerful when you judge yourself? Do you feel vital when you've assessed yourself as not good enough? When we rank ourselves as, we are giving our power away. The antidote to giving our power away is to reclaim it, to take it back. Simply by existing, we are perfect. We are whole, we are complete. Michael gave us that with that meditation. It's very simple. I am perfect, whole, and complete, just as I am. So you can write it down on a little card, put it in your pocket, put it in your pocket, put it in your bag.
Yeah.
Stick it on your mirror, permanent, temporary ink, or whatever. It's your mirror, you decide how you're going to treat it. But I am perfect, whole, and complete, just as I am. I know that Phyllis has her affirmation jar. There's an easy affirmation. You can pull it out at any time. What if we view the imperfect as a way to become more of ourselves? Rather than it being less of ourselves, it's an invitation to be more.
Mm.
What if it's our growing edge? And rather than backing away from our growing edge, we lean into it. I would bet you that the people who are competing in the Olympics have moved into their growing edge quite a lot.
Mm.
And I think that that's one of the things that's fascinating for people and why so many people want to see it, is all of these people have honed their skills to such a level. It's inspirational to see that people have stood up against what was previously impossible. One of the things that I've noticed a lot on television nowadays is there's a lot more viewing and a lot more showing of differently abled people.
Mm.
People who are bound in wheelchairs, or people who have different numbers of limbs, or people who are not perfect. the images that are presented are a wider variety, a greater diversity. In the process of perfectionism, we create a simplistic, dualistic world of it's perfect or it's imperfect. It's good or it's bad. And when we oversimplify the world like that, we are letting go of our power. By reclaiming our power, we see a spectrum of possibilities. We see the places where we may step and go. So Steve Maraboli in Unapologetically You wrote, "Stop trying to fix yourself. You're not broken. You are perfectly imperfect and powerful beyond measure. Stop trying to fix yourself. You're not broken. You are perfectly imperfect and powerful beyond measure." Okay, and the third thing. The third thing is releasing the pressure to act perfectly. Release the pressure to act perfectly. Now this is challenging. Since we were very little, we were told you did it good, but you could do it better. You were close, but not quite good enough. It's one of those things that happens with growing up. Phyllis, she raised, 6 kids, Phyllis? 6? Yeah, 6 kids. I bet that if Phyllis looks back, there are things that Phyllis might have said, I did this when they were little. I learned this for my grandchildren. And I've learned this since even that. Phyllis didn't go to raising her 6 children with maniacally, I am going to screw them up. I want to see how much therapy they will need.
Oh.
It's not what parents do.
Well, most parents.
Stephanie's mom and dad adored her. I have no doubt about that. Whenever Stephanie spoke, they both, they were not necessarily going home about each other, but when Stephanie spoke, they were both here. And they were both so loving. Stephanie has also talked about that wasn't perfect. As an outsider looking in, it looked really great because her parents really seemed to love her. And I know that they screwed up sometimes. I've talked quite a lot about how ways that my mom and dad kind of messed up. That's what happens. Parenting is about having the next generation pick up and go forward. And sometimes we do it wrong. There were things that I learned from my mom and dad that I'm like, I'm not doing this with my kids. And because I had a lot of therapy. A good 12, 15 years of therapy. We're not talking just mild therapy. It was intense therapy. So there were things that I knew. So even though I got into a relationship that was very much like how my dad and my mom interacted. My mom was a pretty passive parent. My dad was a very angry, yelling parent. So if something happened, I knew that my mom was pissed off, but she was quiet and manipulative about it.
I know how that is.
But my dad was never quiet, and he was never manipulative. He was very direct. Listen, you little asshole. It was, there were times that I came home with friends, and to have him yelling that at 3 a.m, listen, you little asshole, it wasn't like a moment that lives in my heart with fondness. It did put pressure on me never to do that again. pieces about perfectionism is that it can paralyze us. We can get stuck either not doing anything or get stuck in doing the same thing over and over again. It could create a constant state of striving where we are continuing trying to get something and go somewhere and arrive. And we let go of satisfaction with where we are. We can get into a state of never feeling good enough. And as an antidote, I am perfect, whole, and complete. I release the pressure about how to act, and I simply am. Again, in the song, Practice Makes Perfect, he talked about letting the chains on his brain, letting them release. We can choose to embrace our imperfections as our doorway to growth. The doorway that we open and go through at our own pace. Perhaps we were raised in a way that there was a certain pace expected. But none of us are living with our parents anymore in the physical world. We may have times where we're reliving it, or in relationships, in former relationships, where we keep reliving and reliving. We're the ones that can release that. So I have this to share from Brene Brown. She identified this as a prayer that she shares. May we find the courage to let go of who we think we're supposed to be, so that we can fully embrace our authentic selves, the imperfect, the creative, the vulnerable, the powerful, the broken, and the beautiful. May we show ourselves and others the compassion that comes from knowing that we are all and struggle. May we create a just and equitable world where privilege isn't simply a prerequisite for self-expression and authenticity, where everyone feels invited and safe to express their power and their vulnerability. And last, may we experience the strength of connection, the love of belonging, and the grace of pure joy. And this is from the foreword in her book that is recommended as the book for the month. So the book for the month is The Gifts of Imperfection. Let go of who you think you're supposed to be and embrace who you are. And it's set up with 10 chapters so that there are 10 action things that you can do. We might want to look at it as a center, as a class to pursue. Anyhow, so in conclusion, I want us to recognize, and I invite us to recognize, the interconnectedness of all creation. So take some time every day. And even if it's just at the last minute, you didn't get it done anywhere before, but the last minute, where was there connections? Where do you see the connections? Life's ups and downs, the progress and the setbacks, they all belong as parts of life. Claim all of those pieces, all of those parts of the whole, rather than so busily sorting it like it's chaff and chaff. The grain and the chaff, you know, the good stuff and the bad stuff. It's all good. Second, reclaim our power to act. See ourselves as worthy expressions of life. Where are the different places where we may act in our lives? That act may be a choice in our thinking. That act may be a physical movement. I saw something before the service. Trevor Noah talked about his experience with ADHD, and he described how he can get fixated on an idea within a conversation, and his mind just goes with that idea. And he's left the conversation, and people will be like, I know that you were somewhere else, Trevor. And what he's described is that he hasn't fixed his ADHD with meds. His action is to recognize that that's the way he moves through the world. So what actions can we take? Trevor Noah's naming what is it that goes on for him is a great example. It's something I'm actually going to use in the future when I meet with families. Because it can be really difficult for a family to understand why that kid cannot concentrate in class. That's their only job. And when they can't do it, but reclaiming the power can be naming what's going on. And finally, releasing the pressures of perfectionism and simply reveling in ourselves as perfect, whole, and complete. Oh, and I didn't share this affirmation with Michael to share. So it isn't very long and shouldn't be all that tricky. I embrace the practice.
I embrace the practice
And progress
and progress
of my perfect life.
of my perfect life.
I embrace the practice
I embrace the practice
and progress
and progress
of my perfect life.
of my perfect life.
And one more time, I embrace the practice
I embrace the practice
and progress
and progress
of my perfect life.
of my perfect life.
And then I have a final song to close out the talk.